Hey everyone, it's Jack Reeve, TalkNorwichCity. Welcome back to another video. It has been a funny old season at Norwich City. I think you would have got a very big price on Jack Wilshere to be managing this football club a while ago, but we are where we are. Jack Wilshere is interim manager and will be for the rest of this season. Granted, now only one game left. It was a far more positive performance and result today, a 0-0 draw, travelling to playoff chasing Middlesbrough. It was a horrific Easter weekend, conceding 8 goals to Portsmouth and Millwall, and ultimately that being the end of Johannes Torp's reign. I think the dust is still settling somewhat on that, and I'm sure there will be plenty more discussion on whether that was the right or the wrong decision, but that decision was made. And ultimately, it came down to performance levels. It came down to I think a pretty clear display that dressing room certainly wasn't fighting as much as they could have done for the head coach, and that was a serious concern, and a sustained period where Norwich were really, really poor. Jack Wilshere has talked a very good game this week. He's incredibly young. I think I read somewhere that he's the third youngest manager to take charge of a championship team. Because he's been around for so long, Jack Wilshere, you just assume he's kind of like mid-40s, but he's not, and this is a huge opportunity for Wilshere. He said in the week very publicly that he thinks he's ready to be a head coach. He wants to be the head coach. And big decisions will be made in the coming weeks and months from Ben Napper and Zoe Webber and the Atanasios to decide whether he is the right man. Look, it's going to be fascinating to see how these next few weeks kind of transpire. He certainly hasn't. He certainly helped his chances of becoming the permanent head coach after today's showing. I thought it was a lot more disciplined. You could tell that the players were a lot more up for it. It was a tweaked system. It was and tweaked personnel. You had kind of Stacey in a far more advanced position. Callum Doyle returned to the squad. Rory McConville started. I thought Angus Gunn looked far better. Jacob Wright is turning into a really, really nice player, like we thought he could be. And I don't know. Part of me is excited about the potential and the future of what could happen at this football club. Part of me is somewhat frustrated. Like, we knew that there were performance levels in this team. We knew that we had the talent with Sights and Sargent and Nunez and Doyle. And where has this been? Where has this been for the last 2 months? I know it's not as simple as that. And look, we've drawn 0-0 with Middlesbrough. It's hardly a groundbreaking result. But Borough are a top 6-ish side. They could well finish in the top 6 this season, and Norwich went toe to toe with them. If Sargent's strike late on is 2 inches the other side of the post, it goes in, and it's a nice away victory. They were, I think Wilshire described it as the game going in spells, and for large parts of that game, Norwich were the better side. But where has that performance been? Where has that, just discipline and fight been? That's really frustrating. It's so evident, and in terms of having players on board, it just went absolutely off a cliff under Johannes. And I'm sure as time moves on and the dust settles, we'll hear stories about exactly what went on in that dressing room. But it was the contrast in performance levels from that Portsmouth game and the Millwall game to this were huge. And ultimately all that's changed is a head coach. And that head coach has been in that dressing room and, around the place for the most of this season. So, look, the past is gone. We can now only look forwards. I have this gut feeling and this sense, and this certainly hasn't, I've got no intel on this, so it is purely my gut. But it feels like Wilshire is going to be the next head coach, permanent head coach of Norwich City. He was brought into the club by Ben Napper. They are good friends. They have worked together previously. They have a close working relationship. And I think Wilshire is an incredibly forward thinking and an ambitious young man. And I think if he wasn't to be given this job permanently, I would suspect that he would be looking for opportunities elsewhere. I might be wrong. And I think Ben Napper desperately wants to keep Wilshire in and around the place. Now, I might be wrong. I think there might be better options out there than Wilshire. My nagging doubt is that, we've just sacked a head coach for, well, granted, it ultimately came down to performance levels, but he was inexperienced, he was young, and this was kind of his first proper stab in English football. Granted, Wilshire has worked in English football, albeit at a youth level, but is also incredibly young and even more inexperienced than Johannes Torp. I think the name of Jack Wilshere carries weight, and I suspect his coaching is fantastic. But to sack one manager for the reasons outlined and then hire another permanent one, and ultimately the characteristics are very similar, feels like a slightly sideways move. It could well happen. And look, all managers need that boost and need that chance to be given to them at some stage. And this could well be Jack Wilshere. I like the talk. I think players are willing to run through brick walls for him. And I like the idea of Norwich City under Jack Wilshere. But something about it just doesn't quite make logical sense of I'm just seeing sidestep rather than okay, we've sacked this manager because there were weaknesses and we've hired one and we've changed those weaknesses. We've got someone with clear EFL experience, maybe gone through a promotion before. I'm just looking at different experience levels from a Wilshire to a Russ Martin or a Gary O'Neill, for example. And there are differences. Equally, Russ and Gary O'Neill and whoever else on that list has at some point been given that opportunity. And maybe this is the opportunity for Jack Wilshere. But look, I like the way that Norwich set up today. I don't think it was as park the bus as some of the away points that we've picked up this season under Johannes. There were opportunities for Norwich. They looked to throw men forwards and get forwards at kind of any possible outcome. And equally, a clean sheet, a good performance from Gunn. Nice to see McConville in the mix, and I think he's going to be a regular next season. Interesting to see him opt for Duffy over Cordoba. I think there's still a lot of development, as there is with a lot of these players for Jose Cordoba. Very interesting around the incredibly positive words for Jack Stacey, and I think if Wilshire, were to become the permanent head coach, then I think you would see Stacey in this starting lineup far more often than he was under Johannes. Granted, Kellen's obviously injured at the moment, so it kind of forced his hand a little bit, but I think he really rates Stacey. Nice to see Doyle in there. Look, this could be his kind of penultimate performance in a Norwich City shirt, but I think on the whole, considering the circumstances, it has been very good for Norwich. There are weaknesses in his game, but a top kind of level championship player. Ball science, good, looked sparkly again, and we've missed that from him. Josh Sargent the same. It kind of just pains me that, one, where has this performance been for the last 2 months? 2, Borja, Josh, we are quickly coming to the end of their, well, you assume the end of their Norwich City careers. And equally, though, on the flip side, McConville, Wright, Schwartau, Forster and Amankwa, exciting potential, and who knows, with the right coach and the right setup and some momentum and some confidence, there is still very much hope that this Norwich side could do good things next season. I've got a feeling that Jack Wilshere, those headlines around him becoming the next head coach could intensify over the coming weeks. I think next week's test against Cardiff on the final game is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Cardiff are already relegated. That now isn't going to the final game. Wilshire has an opportunity for the final day of the season at Carrow Road to put on a really dominant front foot display. No risk, completely no pressure. Let's see what you've got. Let's see how you're set up. Let's see how many goals we can score. Let's see something positive for us to take into the summer. It's going to be fascinating, and you can catch every single move here on TNC. It's going to be a busy few months. This was a much better performance from Norwich City, so you can sip your Laken's beers this evening with some pride. Norwich City have gone to the Riverside and drawn 0-0. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.